Coming up next on Locked On Bucks, part number 2 of the trade deadline primer. What are the Bucks going to do? How many moves do we expect them to make? What happens with the 2031 first-round draft pick? We've got Fayaz from Brew Hoop to help us break it down. Coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia as we get you set for this week's trade deadline. We've got Fayaz from Brew Hoop with us to run through the cap sheet and take a look at some of the moves the Bucks have been linked to. We'll get to all of that chatter momentarily here. Today's episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. All right, without further ado, part 2 of the trade deadline primer with Fayaz. So we've heard the other names. Well, one that was more interesting was Camille and I talked about a week or so ago, and that was Nate Duncan and Danny LaRue talking about in their mock deadline. They had the Bucks getting Brandon Ingram. So that's another one of those names. Now, the challenge there is you would have to sign him. So there would be some type of discourse leading into that trade of, hey, is he open to this for an extension because of his status this summer? But again, and that's the type of thing where he's a young enough player. This is the type of guy that we'd be willing to part with. And I'm not going to say he's a younger version, but I do think there are similarities to his game and Chris Middleton's game. The thing is, you do wonder about some of the spacing because he is a mid-range guy, almost entirely mid-range.
Yeah, and he doesn't one thing we got to mention about Ingram is I'm going to plug him in here. Is like, he has played, I don't know, like a dozen games this year, 19 games this year. I don't think like he's, even though he's 27, like.
Well, I said there's a lot of similarities between.
Right, exactly. Like I'm not super confident in him staying healthy down the stretch either. But here we go. We'll plug him in.
18 games this year, 64 last year, 45 the year before that, 55 the year before that. So.
Okay, so here is the problem with Brandon Ingram right now. So here, I'll undo this really quick and then we'll redo it if you're watching. So he makes more than Chris Middleton. He's just above $36 million. The Bucks are going to have to aggregate players in order to acquire him, and that's going to hard cap them. So, like, in this situation, he comes in this year. We won't worry about an extension. Chris Middleton goes out. For them to match salaries, first of all, there would have to be a third team involved because New Orleans is very close to they are hard capped right now with the first apron. Yeah. They're pretty close to it. So they're not going to be able to take on the salary that the Bucks need to send out beyond like Chris Middleton. You know, Chris Middleton, they would need to acquire in order for the salary matching to work for them. But the Bucks would have to include Bobby Portis or Pat Connaughton. But neither of those guys could go to the Pelicans. There are other teams they could go to, like, for example, Detroit, who's the only cap space team right now. Either of those guys, Connaughton or Portis, could go there without any salary leaving Detroit. The Wizards could take on Pat. They couldn't take on Bobby. The Jazz could take on both guys. But anyway, back to the Bucks. So they end up in this situation when they get rid of those two guys. They're pretty well under the hard cap. Or if they get rid of one of those two guys, let's say if they're getting rid of Portis in the deal, you see here they've got about $4 million below the second apron, which again, they'd be hard capped at. If it's Connaughton they're getting rid of, it's mighty close, $908,000. If and then technically they don't have to fill a roster spot here because they'd be at 14 guys because it'd be a 2-for-1. But you'd have just enough room to squeeze Ryan Rollins in there at some point, but it'd be tough to get a buyout guy again, unless you make some other move to clear out salary of Livingston or Wright or someone. So it would have to be a 3-team deal, I believe, if all my calculations are right, and it's not, I think, a guarantee of, like, first of all, you'd want to extend him. Like, you'd have to have some understanding that, like, okay, Brandon Ingram is going to be in Milwaukee for a while. Do you want that? He's going to command, he's making $36 million. I don't know if he'll get the max this offseason, probably not, but he's going to want a lot of money. He's going to want probably like $40 million a year going forward. So we're talking like a deal well over $160 million bucks, probably like closer to $200 million bucks.
And I think that the deal that they worked out in their mock trade and extension was 3 years, $120 million, with a player option for the 4th year. So right in line with that 40. But then, like, the other challenge of it is kind of getting back to the overarching conversation is, look, any move like that, the Zach LaVine one that we discussed earlier, it has to be the right move, because the league is moving further and further away from building up your team with those types of contracts. And between just Giannis, Damian Lillard, and let's say Brandon Ingram on a 3-year, $120 million extension, you're at what, $160 million basically with those 3 guys alone. And the second apron figure is $208 million or so next year.
Exactly.
So, like, you still got to, form a roster with 11 other players and would have basically $45 million to stay under that level.
Yeah, let's plug these in right here. Like for Ingram, let's just give him $40 million right here. Is that enough zeros? No, that's $400 million. We're not quite there yet.
He'll take it.
He will take it. That's not. I wish we got like actual comments in there. Okay, there you go. So yeah, you all 3 of those guys, it's about $148 million if that's what he's making, and if you extend him out another 4 years, the thing about that's good about this summer for the Bucks is that as it is right now, with even if guys like, as I was saying earlier, like guys like Middleton and Portis opt in next year, they're going to be well under the second apron and probably the first apron too, to the point where they can use their taxpayer mid-level, which, as we see here, about $5.7 million bucks, maybe could get up to the full mid-level next year, but that would hard cap them at the first apron. It would depend. But if you add in Ingram, and I guess this would happen if you'd add in LaVine too, that flexibility is really kind of going away. Like I can just add a couple things in here, but that's a roster of 183 million about for 10 guys. Again, this includes, well, I guess no, it wouldn't be. It would be less. It would be for 8 guys or 9 guys. Let's say they move Portis in this deal. 169.4 million bucks, 0.5 million bucks. You've got some incomplete roster charges that would go in there, that would, add on to their number until you add their cap figure, until you add people in those spots. But you see right here, like their projected cap room. I wish this was updating, or their projected room under the second apron, without all these moves, would have been like around 40 million. With this, it all of a sudden, again, for, let's see, 9 guys, you're now, as you were saying, you got about 45 million to add on some other players, like with that, and you won't have the at this point, you might not have access to the mid-level,
the full,
it's just, like it becomes difficult, like you to add like significant salaries, like players making 10, 15 million bucks. Like if you only have guys who are making like
a lot of money,
if you have someone who's making like 3 million bucks, I mean, the most you can take back, like AJ Johnson next year, for example, you see there, you can only take back like a few million beyond that. Connaughton, you could take back a few million prior to that, but it's like the middle of your roster just kind of goes away, and you don't really have a great way to replenish it.
Well, if you're looking for tickets to your next big event, whether it be a concert, comedy show, sports game, finding the right ticket, the right price can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it has never been easier. Now, let's tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all of the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through the endless ticket listings. I've used Game Time Picks in the past. I talked about my experience with it when I saw the St. Louis Blues play at Fiserv Forum. I've used it for events recently in arenas I've been to before. I just used it to get tickets to see Goose later on this week as well. But more importantly, I've used it for arenas I've been at a number of times where I don't need to see the panoramic view from seat, but I can toggle on the all-in pricing feature and know exactly what that cost is going to be once I get to checkout. You can use a super deal as well for a prime seat. You won't believe the value on those. A total steal. So the best part of all this is you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal elsewhere, they will refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Which is, yeah, it's the challenge that they're having right now too. That you have, in terms of your finances, a top heavy roster where it's guys that are making. It's just Pat and Bobby basically that are making less than $20 million and then some with some of the other names, or your minimums or rookie scale deals that you're on. And it doesn't give you a whole lot of flexibility to make those moves. So that's the other thing to keep in mind for the Bucks. A couple other quick names here. And this is more of just, look, here's the challenge with this to talk through those things is we started to see, I forget where the report came from, but it started to pick up more and more traction earlier in the day on Tuesday that the Bucks were showing some interest in Jericho Sims of the Knicks. I mean, look, yeah, fine. That's the type of player that you would certainly be interested in, especially given his age and the value of his contract. The issue becomes, okay, what are the Knicks looking for? Because number one, like we've heard, they're shopping Mitchell Robinson and they would like to replenish that. So are they making multiple moves if that's the case? But Jericho Sims' contract is the minimum, just over $2 million. And, just talking about what you were before with the second apron levels and what you got to be cognizant of with minimum contracts if you got to round out the roster, that's where the Knicks are, that they have just enough room under the second apron right now that I think they're about 500,000 under that apron figure. So this isn't,
and they're hard cap too, aren't they?
Yeah. So I was going to say, so it's not like you can just say, well, we'll give them Pat Connaughton and a draft pick for this. Like they can't take on that salary. So
they can't really,
unless,
no.
Yeah. So unless it's, hey, the Knicks want to give you Jericho Sims, like you can't even give him Marjan Beauchamp in that trade, essentially.
Yeah, and the crappy thing is here is like Sims is literally making like $5,000 more than the veteran minimum. Like,
yeah.
So you couldn't
even trade like here's DeLon Wright.
I mean, I think the thing is like since DeLon Wright's on a minimum, like he could go to New York. But the Bucks, because every team has the minimum salary exception where like, unless you're hard capped, you can just add a player in a minimum deal. But that is not applicable to Jericho Sims, unfortunately. So the Bucks could, they would have to send out someone making north of Wright. So we're talking AJ Green or Marjan Beauchamp. But then New York can't take on those guys. So okay, maybe add a third team in, right?
It just seems like every name that pops up, you run into that. Where it's, well, this, and like the other thing to keep in mind for all these deals too, that we've tried to talk about and I've discussed whenever people have, asked us about, hey, what about this deal? Or people that call into the radio show too is, it's not just the Bucks cap situation you have to worry about. We touched on it with the Knicks. Other teams too. Other teams that are hard capped at the first apron because they took back more money in a previous deal or they used the mid-level. So like you have to be aware of that as well. And it just seems like there's no real avenue to make a trade unless it's involving the Detroit Pistons or another team. Like it's going to have to be a 3-team deal.
Exactly. And should we talk about the guy who started off this whole trade season melee? Because he would need to be a 3-for-1. All right, let's plug in Jimmy Butler here for Chris Middleton. That would need to be a 3-for-1 deal, and it would have to be a 3-team trade because we will put in his expiring $48.7 million contract. Let's take out these unlikely benefits. This would hard cap the Bucks because on top of Middleton, they would also need to add in Portis and Connaughton, either those two or Brook Lopez. They both make about like that. Those two guys and Brook Lopez are both kind of around the same. One would be 22 million, the other would be 23 million. So let's take it as Portis and Connaughton coming out here. So again, Bucks going to need to fill a roster spot, and they're hard capped. Look at their apron figure right there, Justin. 188.2. Getting really tight there. $703,000. That's all you have to convert Ryan Rollins onto a 2-way deal or off of his 2-way deal. Forget about a buyout or anything like that. It puts you right up against what would be a hard cap if you're getting Butler. And the other thing is, like you were talking about, the Heat would also get hard capped in this situation, I think, because they're taking if all of those 3 players go back to the Heat, Connaughton, Middleton, Portis, that wouldn't work for them because that would get them hard capped at the first apron because they'd be taking in more salary than they're sending out. So you've got to send Connaughton, one of those guys, Connaughton or Middleton would have to go to the Heat, but Connaughton or Portis has to go to a third team. So yeah, we're talking about Detroit, maybe Washington or Utah. So that's the problem with the Jimmy Butler trade. It needs to be 3 teams, and it leaves the Bucks really close to that hard cap. And he's a free agent this summer too, and he's 35 years old. There are a lot of things.
And speaking of that, so more that we've heard in this past 24-ish hours, the Warriors are basically kicking the tires on every asset that's out there. Even though Steph Curry advised them, don't make a panic trade. It seems like that's what we're headed towards. And the Warriors apparently showing an interest in Bobby Portis as well. Yep.
Did you see that tweet? Someone today had said, like, this is like when it's like 1:30 in the club and you're just hollering at everybody. If you're the Warriors. That's Mike Dunleavy right now. Mike Dunleavy Jr.
Well, when you look at the Warriors roster, look, they have a number of salaries that would match with the Bucks and save the Bucks some cap space as well. Not enough to get you under the second apron, but it would still save you some money there. But
so you think it would be like they could be in there as a facilitator? Like they've been talked about as a facilitator for a Butler trade to the Suns. You think it could be for the Warriors?
Well, I mean, it could be if, let's say, if the Warriors are actually interested in Bobby Portis, you could actually, I haven't looked at what the Warriors total cap figure is.
They're hard capped at the first apron.
At the first,
so
yeah.
Yeah.
So
I don't know how far under it they are, but I know they're pretty close.
Yeah, I think they're really close. So they have about $1.5 million in room. Yep. So that's another one where it would have to be a 3-team trade because Bobby's salary is just under 13 million. And everybody on the Warriors, it seems like, is either Steph Curry making his 50 million, Andrew Wiggins and Draymond Green are both around 25 million. Everybody else is at that just under $9 million figure. So you'd need a third team because the Warriors would be taking on close to $4 million more in salary for any of those names. They're intriguing names if Golden State is willing to part with those. When you think about, well, would Bobby Portis be the Kyle Anderson replacement? And I think
Would
we've
love
seen
Jonathan Kuminga, right?
well, and that's the thing too. Like, hey, if you're not willing to pay him and you think Bobby Portis can help us right now,
oh
fine.
man,
You deal with the Jonathan Kuminga.
wow.
I think the Bucks would gladly
Mike
say,
Dunleavy was
yeah,
that desperate.
yeah, we will definitely pay
Like
him
I said,
this offseason.
2 a.m. in the club. You need someone to take him home.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are some of your relationship green flags? We often hear about red flags we should avoid. But if we're focused more on identifying the positive signs in our relationship, those are green flags. If you're not sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify them, actively practice them, and even embody that green flag energy yourself. Whether you're dating, married, building a relationship, or just working on yourself, therapy can help you form relationships that love you back. Therapy helps you develop healthy boundaries and improves your communication skills. It empowers you to set clear expectations and express your needs in relationships. Therapy provides tools for managing conflict in ways that strengthen your connections rather than break them down. BetterHelp makes it easy by offering online therapy with over 30,000 licensed therapists to choose from. And if you need to switch therapists, you can do so at no extra cost. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. It would be a three-team deal, but it also seems like, look, the more likely options are like Kevon Looney or Kyle Anderson is what you would be getting back. And sure, you'd get
Milwaukee native,
something.
I've said him a bunch this deadline. Like he would be.
Well,
a great
I mean,
fourth
Camille
pick.
and I thought over this. Camille and I thought over the summer, and it sounded like the Warriors were not going to. He wasn't going to be back. All right, veteran minimum. Like this makes sense as your backup big. But again, I just think that the tough spot the Bucks are in with Bobby is, we can point out some of the flaws defensively and everything else, but I think Bobby Portis still has a pretty fair amount of value across the league. And I just feel like you could do better than that. And that contract, especially for what you can get from him, like nobody's bringing in Bobby Portis to be their best or even third best player on the team. But at that value, at that contract figure, it's a pretty good deal.
I think he's one of the Bucks' most valuable assets. I remember I ranked all of their trade pieces a couple weeks ago on Brew Hoop. I had him near the top. Obviously, that 2031 first round pick was at the top, but I think I had him at maybe third or fourth. He's likely going to opt out of that contract this summer.
Yeah.
He could opt in for 13 million, 13.4 million. He probably wants to opt out, get one more payday at 30.
Yeah, I was going to say, like at the
But
very
he's an
least,
expiring contract, so that's valuable too.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least,
he's expiring.
Yeah, and at the very least, I think with the productivity he has shown you offensively and the ability to rebound to, like, at the very least, he can opt out and look for 3 years, $75 million.
Totally. So he's valuable. He's valuable to the Bucks. He's one of those guys, like we talk about. I think maybe, I don't know if you and Camille have said this. I've definitely heard other people saying this, and I agree. Like Chris Middleton is probably more valuable to the Bucks than he is to other teams. Bobby Portis is probably just as valuable to other teams than he is to the Bucks, maybe even more so.
Yeah.
Well, do we want to try a couple other quick names? Like there was one other guy who was mentioned in rumors today, who is there were two guys who look exactly the same, and one of them was traded. The other wasn't.
Yes.
Cody Martin Caleb Martin. There was a rumor this morning. It's like, okay, Caleb Martin. Bucks are looking at him. He got traded to the Mavericks. But Cody Martin, his twin brother on the Hornets, he's an interesting one. So we'll plug him in. His salary is $8.1 million. That slides in pretty nice with Connaughton. The thing is, though, like here, we'll put him in right now. So looks pretty good, right? that doesn't get them under the second apron or anything. But he's a younger guy, Cody Martin, pretty good defender. Also has 2 years left on his deal, but next year is not guaranteed. So even though he's making about $700,000-800,000 less than Connaughton next year, it's fully unguaranteed. So
both of the remaining,
the Hornets could just wash their hands of that contract this summer, as could the Bucks. That's just going to mean like the Bucks will have to pay a little bit more. Like it's not not only like Martin's the more valuable player. Not only is he a few years younger, like he's an expiring deal if you want him to be. So I think he would require that 2031 second round pick, definitely.
At least that,
and maybe like Tyler Smith or someone. You see, the Bucks, like if they were, we talk about this aggregation thing. If the Bucks were to trade Connaughton, who makes $9 million, and then they want to sweeten it a little bit for Charlotte, they add in Tyler Smith. Yeah, they're not actually aggregating those players because aggregating means that you are putting two salaries together in order to take on the salary of someone else.
Yeah.
The Bucks wouldn't be doing that because they'd only be using Connaughton's salary to take on Martin's salary. Tyler Smith would be like just kind of icing on the cake. So that's a possibility too. But do you really want to do that for Cody Martin? I don't know.
And he's another guy too, already close to 30 years old. You forget how long he's been in the league, but yeah, I mean, there was always some nice parts to his game. Both he and Caleb, when they were playing together in Charlotte and way back when playing together in Nevada. And it wasn't until we saw Caleb go to Miami that he really started to flourish. And as you mentioned, traded earlier in the day on Tuesday from Philly to Dallas in a deal where Dallas actually gave up the better player in that trade.
I mean, yeah, like by the numbers and certainly the younger player, it was kind of a weird deal. Quentin Grimes
and a draft asset too.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of Quentin Grimes. Maybe I hope one day he ends up on the Bucks, but I guess he's going to spend some time in Philly first if he ever does. That's an interesting trade, though, for sure.
Yeah, and some other names like we don't need to spend too much time on, but all the names that you've heard mentioned, it just seems like look at a bad team and let's look at their roster and see, okay, well, they've got to be willing to sell off pieces right now. You've seen a lot of people mentioning, what about Portland? And let's look at guys on Portland's roster. Jerami Grant is, a name that's come up just under $30 million. So like, could you trade Chris Middleton?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like it would work straight up, but again, you're not getting under the second apron. You wouldn't have to worry about it because you're not aggregating that deal. But you're taking on not a lot, but you're taking on a decent amount of money as his contract runs through 26, 27, and then I think he has a player option in the 27-28 season as well. He's already about to turn 31 years old, and like these are the moves where like even if it was, hey, we'll give you Jerami Grant for Chris Middleton straight up, even with what we've seen from Chris and your questions of like, I don't know if he's going to be the same guy, that's still a lot of money to be taking on for a team that by the time that player option hits in 27-28, it may be over for the Bucks.
Yeah, I'm worried as well that Portland would, some of the trades I'd seen with that proposal, with Grant coming in for Middleton from national outlets, they include the 2031 first in there. Again, it's not a guy I'm giving up. That's one of the most valuable draft picks available at this deadline.
It's maybe the most valuable asset that's out there.
And like as we learned this weekend by this the Luka Doncic trade, like would I like? I was thinking last week, like, all right, there's a few players I would give up that 2031 pick for. That are probably not available.
I'm guessing Jerami Grant wasn't on that list.
He wasn't on that list. I was thinking like, okay, maybe you can call up Charlotte and be like, hey, we'll give you this pick if and Chris Middleton for Brandon Miller or something like that. Just guys who aren't likely to be available. Right. And I thought, well, I'd definitely give that up for Luka Doncic, but there's no way. And then what happens? So, Yeah, it's just not Jerami Grant. Or
Yeah,
really any of these guys we're talking about.
That's the thing. Like most of the names we've gone over, it's part of it is it's any negotiation where you have to be dealing from a point of strength, and teams know that's not the Bucks. So, like, look, ordinarily we may have to attach an asset to get off of this Jerami Grant contract, but we know the spot you're in too. So no, we're not, and you're giving us an asset. Like that's unfortunately what the Bucks and a handful of other teams are going to be up against at this deadline too. Robert Williams of the Blazers, another one that's been mentioned. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have Time Lord here as a backup big, as a big that you could play alongside Giannis and give you a little bit more versatility. But let's also keep in mind, health has not always been on his side.
That would mean Bobby Portis too, right? Bobby Portis
that would mean
at least a second round pick.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, Portland would need something else too, because, well, Bobby is going to opt out. So we're just giving him to you to lose any type of asset. We need something else in this deal.
I think by himself, he's someone who would fetch a couple second round picks, regardless of the player that's coming in. And, you know, before we wrap, speaking of like draft picks being attached to Bucks players, there was our friend Eric Name had reported that there's buzz around the league that for the Bucks to get off of Pat Connaughton without like dump that salary, which would get them under the apron, they would have to attach. It was termed as like multiple, like 3 or 4 second round picks, and then or a late first round pick in the coming years, which the Bucks don't have.
Right.
But also, I've seen this from even national writers. Like the Bucks don't just need to dump Pat Connaughton before they can do any of these aggregating deals or these moves that would hard cap them in the second apron. They can do all those. It just is a matter of what happens at the end of the trade. Did you do something that would like aggregating players or taking back more money or whatever? Does that hard cap you? Like you can make those moves, but at the end of the trade, if after it's over and it's like something that violates it, hard caps you, then you just got to be under it then. So the Bucks don't need to just like dump Pat Connaughton for nothing right now in order to make some of these moves.
Yeah, I mean, I still think, and I think we've both agreed on this so far, I think Bobby Portis is a really good asset across the league, and especially if you're a team that you feel like this is either a starting power forward for us on a group where we have solid defense around him and capable role players coming off the bench. He's our sixth man, something like that. And we feel comfortable that we can work out an extension with him, and we want him here for the long haul. He's still younger than Giannis, just turned 30 years old. I think he's a pretty valuable asset. So the notion of, well, the Bucks just don't have anything to deal, I think there's a market for Bobby, and we've started to hear that. The issue is, what we've seen this week. What's the backup plan? Because if you do trade Bobby Portis, it has to either come back in that trade and then it's part of a 3 or 4 team deal with multiple guys going out from you, or there's something else that you have lined up, be it the buyout market or some other trade, that you're getting somebody else that can at least play the 4 and play next to Giannis. Yeah, because you can't navigate the rest of the season with just Giannis and Brook Lopez.
No, and I think that it would probably, on the buyout market, it would probably be easier to get a big man than it would another
like
position
a
of need, like a perimeter defender. Like I've talked about on Brew Hoop, like, okay, how about like Javon Carter, someone like that, which that's a salary that would work for Connaughton, and because Carter doesn't play that much, you probably wouldn't have to give up too much in addition to him, so that's like more of a player that you'd get like in a trade. You're probably not going to get that type of player in the buyout market. And then maybe you can find someone, but it'd be someone like Alex Len, just a big body, right? Like an insurance policy. That's one route they could go. But yeah, if you're trading Portis, you might end up going without that player for a little stretch in there. Thankfully, the All-Star break kind of is falling in that 2-week window after the deadline where you would need to get up to 14 guys. So it might not be too many games, at least.
Yeah, I was going to say, could I interest you in Christian Wood? I mean,
I've talked about him. Yeah, we've thought about him. My boss Harrison Fagan at SB Nation is used to run the Silver Screen Roll, the Lakers site, and he was talking about it, and I said, yeah, sure, if they can make something work, bring him back home. Frank, he still, I don't think he sold his land in the Christian Woodlands. There's probably still a lot of Bucks that might have a plot.
I don't think
there.
Frank still owns it. Personally, I know I was only renting too, and I moved on to a different building after
Now
that.
you're on an island.
Yeah.
Well, are you still on Livingston Island?
I'm gonna plead the fifth on that one after what I've seen. Doesn't really look like a great prediction from me when we go back to the off season so far. So,
okay, I won't put you on the spot.
There is that. Yeah, and like for the Bulls, as we start to wrap here, Javon Carter. I mean, I still think they need another, not necessarily point guard type, but just somebody that can initiate and handle the ball and bring the ball up the floor. So Javon Carter would fit that mold. I mean, I don't know how much you're going to heap upon Ryan Rollins in the playoffs. Number one, you got to upgrade him so he's even available for the playoffs to begin with. And with the Bulls, you mentioned the Pat Connaughton deal. They need some other sweetener. You could just say, look, we'll give you Pat Connaughton and we'll just give you tickets to Fiserv Forum since you have so many fans that are already coming here. You don't have to charge them. Here's tickets. Here's X amount of tickets for the next 5 years that you guys just have free reign at for Bulls and Bucks games at Fiserv.
Javon Carter, he's not played very much this year at all. Just like
it's kind of the story of his career, oddly enough.
I know. Like, can the Bucks save his career once more? He makes. I think next year he's around $6.8 million. It's on a player option, just like Connaughton, and just like Connaughton, he's gonna exercise that option. But a guy who's slightly younger and cheaper than Pat Connaughton, the Bucks are going to have to give up an asset, but to get Carter in a Connaughton for him trade. But I don't think the fact that they're not playing him at all, and they have a real log jam at point guard, which got even jammier when they got Trey Jones this weekend.
Yeah.
Like they're not playing him at all. They're not going to play him. They can't buy him out because he has a guarantee that he can guarantee his salary for next year. So I would just think like the second round pick, the 2031 second round pick, probably a little too rich for Javon Carter given what he's been since he's come to Chicago. But I don't know. You're talking about tickets, like, hey, how about a lottery ticket like Chris Livingston or Tyler Smith, right?
I mean, I would also kick the tires on someone like Kobe White's and see, hey, what's it going to take here?
Yeah, I don't know. The Bulls seem to finally be open for business on a rebuild now. We'll see what they do with Vooch, but that's another thing I've been interested in. Like if Vooch is going to the Warriors, for example, the expiring salaries of Looney and Gary Payton II are going to have to go out. So can the Bucks like swoop in on one of those guys?
Yeah,
because the Bulls are their roster is totally full right now. If they make another trade, they would have to waive another guy.
Yeah, I mean, they just had to waive 2 guys to make the deals they made possible. So they're going to be in the same spot as a facilitator in any other deals here. So 2 quick things for you as we wrap here. Over under on amount of moves the Bucks make. If we put it at 1.5, would you take the over or under?
Before the
between
2 p.m. deadline on Thursday, or whenever it is, I would take the under. But if it was 0.5, I would take the over. I think they'll make 1.
And then who's most likely to be moved?
I said this. This is maybe going to surprise you because I said this a week or so ago on an article that went up on SB Nation when we were asked all the site managers, who's the most likely guy from your team who's going to be traded at the deadline. I said DeLon Wright because I could see a move just like what happened last year where they traded a minimum guy campaign to the Sixers with a second-round pick, and they got Patrick Beverley back. I could see them doing the same thing, DeLon Wright plus a the second round pick,
31 second round pick. Yeah.
Someone on a minimum, maybe like, okay, here are two names that'll maybe be interesting to you. Speaking of former Bulls, another minimum guy on the Pelicans, Javon Green, on a minimum contract, expiring contract. Here's an even more interesting one, though. How about Jose Alvarado?
Yeah,
that second round pick. He makes a little bit less than right. That trade, maybe you have to add in a little bit more of a sweetener, like Andre Jackson Jr. Like, do you think he's ever going to be necessarily as good as Jose Alvarado? I think that's something I would have to think about at least. That was the trade, but I wouldn't do like both the second round pick and Ajax for him necessarily. Just a thought.
Yeah. Or even New Orleans is an interesting team because that's a team to keep an eye on with names like Javon Green, Alvarado, Daniel Tice, like those guys more so than all the other names that have been mentioned. Just because like everybody's had the Zion discussion, but you could chalk this year up to injuries. It's not going to get any better next year with DeJounte Murray missing a large chunk of next year now, that I think it kind of forced New Orleans' hand to say, we got to start over once again. So
they're going to trade Ingram too in the next
year. So. It's not coming back there. All those names are interesting. They would love to trade CJ McCollum too, if there's a market for him. So all those, I don't think that market's in Milwaukee.
Come back and play with your old buddy. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
It's going to be very interesting here in the next 24 plus hours. And I mean, we didn't really mention the Phoenix Suns at all, but I've said a couple of times, last thing as we wrap here, but this is the last thing. What the Suns did with their first round pick. And by the way, now the reporting of, we're not necessarily shopping him, but we're willing to listen to offers on Kevin Durant.
Yeah.
Why did you make that pick then with the 2031 first? But as we've just talked through, well, you would need this and you would need this type of sweetener. Is that anything you would entertain if you were the Bucks to turn basically $1 into 3/4?
1 into 3. It sounds like, I thought I read something earlier today that teams have approached the Bucks about doing that. I when that first happened a couple weeks ago, I was like, that's interesting. I might do that if I were the Bucks. The problem is, it's like, all right, who are those extra first round picks going for? I'm just going to throw this out there. What if it is for Kevin Durant? Like, what if, I mean, to get him to come to Milwaukee would take a lot. It would be very difficult, but that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. It'd need to be a 3-team trade for one, because you think the Bucks are in second apron hell. The Suns are even worse.
I mean, the Suns have the largest tax bill as well by a wide margin. I think it's twice as much as what the Bucks are, more than twice as much as what the Bucks are paying. It's twice as much as the Timberwolves. So it's the Suns, Timberwolves, and Bucks that have the 3 largest tax bills. The Suns are at $164 million. Timberwolves are at 83 and the Bucks are at 74. So
Bucks have a better record than the Timberwolves right now. I forget.
It's close. I think.
Well, the Bucks have the best record of those 3 teams, maybe. So
yeah,
that's something good.
It's within a game or so.
Not much, but it's there.
Yeah, it's. I wouldn't automatically say no. Like at the time when the Suns made that trade, I think everybody thought, "Why are you doing this?" I wouldn't automatically say no. I probably would have said that a week or so ago whenever Phoenix made that trade of don't do that and take back pennies on the dollar. But now as you just kind of talk through, I think there's a path for some of these trades, but you just need more to offer. I wouldn't totally be opposed to it, but it comes back to what are you getting back in return? Like the player that you're making that move for, it can't just be we need something other than the 2031 second round pick. So we're going to get a lesser first rounder and throw it in to bring back like a Jose Alvarado type of player. Yeah.
Well, I don't know, Justin, as I'm looking at my phone, I'm not seeing any,
I haven't seen anything happen yet.
Bombs. I think we made it through this entire podcast without a trade happening, at least for the Bucks, and hopefully that'll still be the case when this drops tomorrow morning.
Let's hope. Going to be very interesting here for this next day. Plus, I know Camille and I are going to have a show at some point Thursday afternoon to sift through what happened in the trade deadline and moves, whether it was the Bucks or around the Bucks. But we got that coming for you on Thursday. Van, always appreciate catching up with you. Thanks for the time, the spreadsheet, and talking through some of these rumors and potential deals out there for the Bucks.
My pleasure. It was a lot of fun, man.
That'll do it for today's show. For Van, I'm Justin. We will talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.